The sun hung high in the sky over a quiet suburban neighborhood in Virginia. It was one of those days where everything seemed perfect. The air smelled fresh, birds chirped cheerfully, and the streets were lined with trees casting gentle shadows on the pavement. The houses looked like they had been plucked straight from a postcard. Clean white fences, flower beds bursting with color, and shiny cars parked in driveways. Everything about this place screamed peace and order, but not everyone felt at ease here. Laura Bennett stood on her porch, sipping lemonade from a glass tumbler. Her eyes scanned the street, landing finally on the house next door. That house used to belong to the Millers, an elderly couple who always waved hello and kept their yard immaculate. But now, it belonged to someone else. Someone different. Marcus Johnson had moved in just 2 weeks ago. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with dark skin and a calm demeanor. Laura didn't know much about him yet, but she already disliked him. She couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was because he didn't smile enough when he said hello, or maybe it was because he wore suits even on weekends. Or maybe it was something deeper, something she wouldn't admit even to herself. All she knew was that he didn't fit into her idea of what the neighborhood should look like. Laura sighed heavily, setting her glass down on the railing. She watched as Marcus walked out of his garage, carrying a bucket and a sponge. He set them, down by his car, a sleek black sedan, and began washing it. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. He didn't turn up the radio or whistle a tune like most people did when doing chores outside. Instead, he worked quietly, occasionally glancing around but never lingering too long on anything, or anyone. As Laura continued to watch, another neighbor approached Marcus. It was Emily, a young white woman who lived across the street. She stopped briefly to chat with him, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. Marcus nodded politely, responding with a few words before returning to his task. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a normal exchange between neighbors, but to Laura, it was proof of something sinister. Her grip tightened on the railing as she leaned forward slightly, squinting. "What's he saying to her?" she muttered under her breath. "Why is he talking to her? She doesn't need to talk to him." Her mind raced with possibilities, each more far-fetched than the last. Was he trying to intimidate her? Threaten? Her? Maybe he was asking invasive questions about the neighborhood. Whatever it was, Laura was certain it wasn't good. She turned abruptly and went back inside, slamming the screen door behind her. Her heart pounded in her chest as anger bubbled up inside her. This wasn't right. People like him didn't belong here. They disrupted the peace, made things uncomfortable. And now he was harassing poor Emily. She couldn't let this go unchecked. Pacing back and forth in her living room, Laura tried to think of what to do. She could confront him directly, tell him off for being rude and intrusive. But no, that would be too risky. What if he got angry? What if he lashed out? No, she needed a safer option. Something official. Something that would send a clear message, without putting her in harm's way. Her eyes landed on the phone sitting on the coffee table. Of course. Why hadn't she thought of it sooner? Picking it up, she dialed 911 with trembling fingers. When the operator answered, Laura launched into a frantic explanation. "There's a suspicious person in my neighborhood," she said, her voice rising with every word. "He's a black man, and he's acting strangely. I saw him talking to one of my neighbors, a young woman, and it looked threatening. I think he might be dangerous. You need to come check it out." The operator asked for details, his location, description, anything specific that might help identify him. Laura rattled off answers quickly, emphasizing how urgent the situation was. By the time she hung up, she felt a mix of relief and triumph. Finally, someone would deal with this problem. Finally, her concerns would be taken seriously. Unbeknownst to Laura, Marcus was far from ordinary. In fact, he wasn't even named Marcus Johnson. His real name was Elijah Carter, and he was one of the highest-ranking officials in the country. Appointed as the head of the FBI just months earlier, Elijah had chosen to live undercover in this suburban neighborhood as part of a personal mission. He wanted to understand firsthand the challenges faced by marginalized communities, especially in predominantly white areas. He had hoped to observe quietly, gather insights, and use what he learned to shape policy changes within the Bureau. Elijah finished washing his car and stepped back to admire his work. The sedan gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting the blue sky above. He wiped his hands on a towel and glanced around, taking in the peaceful surroundings. Despite Laura's hostility, he found the neighborhood charming in its own way. There was a simplicity to life here that appealed to him, even if it came with complications. Just then, he noticed 2 police cars pulling up to the curb. Officers stepped out, their expressions cautious as they approached his driveway. Elijah raised an eyebrow, intrigued rather than alarmed. He had expected some resistance during his stay, but he hadn't anticipated it happening so soon, or in such a dramatic fashion. One of the officers called out, "Sir, are you Marcus Johnson?" Elijah nodded calmly, walking toward them. "Yes, that's me. Is there a problem?" Officer Daniels, the older of the two, hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We received a report about a suspicious individual in the area. Can we ask you a few questions?" Elijah smiled faintly, his demeanor unshaken. "Of course, I'd be happy to cooperate." As he spoke, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. Flipping it open, he revealed a badge and identification card. The officers froze, their eyes widening in shock. "I'm actually Elijah Carter," he said smoothly. "Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I assume this misunderstanding can be resolved quickly." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly, the officers began to process what they were seeing. Officer Daniels stammered an apology, while Ramirez looked both embarrassed and furious. Elijah assured them there was no need for further action, but requested that the incident be documented for future reference. Back inside her house, Laura peeked through the curtains, watching the scene unfold. At first, she felt vindicated, convinced that her call had prompted swift action. But as the minutes passed, she noticed something odd. The officers weren't arresting Marcus, they were shaking hands with him. Confusion clouded her face as she struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. Little did she know her actions had set off a chain reaction that would change not only her life, but also the lives of everyone around her. Elijah stood calmly on his driveway, watching the 2 police officers exchange uncertain glances. Officer Daniels, the older of the pair, adjusted his hat nervously, his weathered face showing signs of discomfort. His younger partner, Officer Ramirez, shifted her weight from one foot to the other, gripping her notepad like it was a lifeline. Neither of them seemed sure how to proceed now that they realized who, or rather what, they were dealing with. "I'm sorry, sir," Daniels finally managed to say, his voice low and apologetic. "We didn't mean any disrespect. We were just following up on a call we received." Elijah nodded, his expression remaining neutral. "I understand," he said evenly. "You're doing your job, but I'd appreciate it if you could document this incident for future reference. It's important to keep records of these kinds of situations." Officer Ramirez stepped forward slightly, her tone firmer than her partner's. "Sir, can you tell us anything about the caller? Do you have any idea why someone would report you?" Elijah glanced briefly toward Laura's house, where the curtains twitched ever so slightly. He didn't need to guess who had made the call. Still, he chose his words carefully. "Not specifically, no, but I've been living here for a couple of weeks and I've noticed some resistance to my presence. Nothing major, just little things. People staring longer than necessary or avoiding eye contact when I greet them." Daniels frowned, looking genuinely troubled. "That's unfortunate, sir. No one should feel unwelcome in their own neighborhood." Elijah gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Thank you for saying that. Unfortunately, it happens more often than most people realize. That's part of why I'm here, to understand these dynamics better." The officers exchanged another glance, this time tinged with admiration. They had expected anger or frustration from Elijah, maybe even demands for action against the caller. Instead, he was composed, thoughtful, and focused on the bigger picture. It was hard not to respect him for it. "Well, sir," Daniel said after a pause, "we'll make sure everything gets documented properly. And again, We apologize for disturbing you. Thank you, Elijah replied. Have a good day. As the officers returned to their patrol car and drove away, Elijah turned his attention back to Laura's house. He could still see the faint outline of her figure behind the curtain, though she had pulled back slightly once she realized he was looking in her direction. For a moment he considered letting the matter drop. After all, nothing serious had come of her call, and confronting her might only escalate tensions further. But then he shook his head. This wasn't just about him. It was about setting an example. If he let behavior like hers slide without addressing it, others might think it was acceptable. More importantly, Laura needed to understand the impact of her actions, not just on him, but on the community as a whole. The next morning, Elijah decided to pay her a visit. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit that commanded respect, he walked across the neatly trimmed lawn separating their houses and knocked firmly on her door. Inside, Laura froze mid-step as she heard the knock. She peeked through the peephole and immediately recognized Marcus. No, Elijah, as he had introduced himself to the police officers. Her stomach churned with a mix of guilt and defiance. After a long pause, she reluctantly opened the door, plastering a fake smile on her face. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice overly sweet. "Can I help you with something?" Elijah met her gaze steadily, his presence radiating authority. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. May I come in for a moment? There are a few things I'd like to discuss." Laura hesitated, clearly uneasy. She glanced over her shoulder as if searching for an excuse to refuse, but Elijah's polite yet firm demeanor left little room for argument. Reluctantly, she stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. The inside of Laura's house was immaculate, every surface polished to perfection. Framed, family photos lined the walls and floral-patterned furniture dominated the living room. Elijah took a seat on the edge of the couch while Laura perched stiffly on a chair across from him. "So," she began, forcing a laugh. "What brings you here today? Everything okay?" Elijah leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let's not beat around the bush, Mrs. Bennett. I assume you're aware of the reason the police visited me yesterday." Her smile faltered, and she crossed her arms defensively. "Oh, that. Well, I must have misunderstood something. You know how it is. People get nervous when they see strangers acting strangely. I'm sure it was all just a big misunderstanding." Elijah studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "A misunderstanding," he repeated slowly. "Is that what you're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems more like a deliberate attempt to cause trouble." Laura bristled at his words. "Now wait just a minute, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just concerned about my safety. You can't blame me for being cautious." "No, I don't blame you for wanting to feel safe," Elijah countered. "But let's be honest, you weren't concerned about your safety. You called the police because I'm black. And whether you admit it or not, that makes this a racial issue." Laura opened her mouth to protest, but Elijah held up a hand, silencing her. "Before you say anything else, let me introduce myself properly. My name isn't Marcus Johnson. It's Elijah Carter, and I'm the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." If Laura had been uncomfortable before, she was downright flustered now. Her face flushed red, and she stammered, What? You're the head of the FBI?" "That's correct," Elijah confirmed. "And contrary to what you may believe, I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I want to help you and others like you understand why your actions matter. Calling the police on someone simply because of the color of their skin isn't just hurtful, it's dangerous. It perpetuates stereotypes and creates unnecessary fear. Worse, it puts innocent lives at risk." Laura looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously in her lap. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. I didn't mean for it to go that far," she murmured. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "And that's exactly the problem," Elijah said gently. "You acted out of instinct, without stopping to consider the consequences. But ignorance isn't an excuse, Mrs. Bennett. We all have a responsibility to challenge our biases and learn from our mistakes." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. Here's what's going to happen next. Instead of pressing charges, which I could easily do, I'm giving you an opportunity to participate in a nationwide program aimed at addressing implicit bias and fostering understanding between communities. You'll attend workshops, listen to personal stories, and engage in discussions designed to broaden your perspective. If you refuse, however, I won't hesitate to take legal action. Laura swallowed hard, her mind racing. On one hand, she wanted to argue, to insist that she hadn't done anything wrong. But deep down, she knew Elijah was right. She couldn't deny the truth of his words, no matter how much she wished she could. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." Elijah stood, extending a hand. "Good. I'll send you the details later today. Thank you for agreeing to this, Mrs. Bennett. Change starts with awareness, and I believe you're capable of growth." As he walked back to his house, Elijah felt a sense of cautious optimism. Confronting Laura hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. What happened next would depend largely on her willingness to learn, and on the support she received along the way. Meanwhile, Laura sat alone in her living room, staring at the empty space where Elijah had been moments earlier. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to question the beliefs she had clung to so fiercely. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't happen overnight. But perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something new. For her, for the neighborhood, and for countless others willing to confront their own prejudices. The first workshop was held at the local community center, a bright, airy space designed to foster connection and learning. Laura arrived reluctantly, clutching her purse tightly as she scanned the room. She had expected a small gathering, maybe a handful of people sitting around a table. Instead, the room was filled with over 24 participants, all ages and backgrounds represented. Some looked curious, others determined, and a few seemed as uncomfortable as she felt. Laura hesitated by the door, unsure where to sit. She spotted an empty chair near the back and quickly claimed it, hoping to blend into the background. As she settled in, she noticed a young black man speaking animatedly to the group. His name tag read Jamal Thompson, and he introduced himself as a former teacher turned activist. He spoke with conviction, sharing stories about growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood and the challenges he faced because of his race. "People don't always realize how their words or actions affect others," Jamal said, his voice steady but kind. "It's not just about big, obvious acts of racism, it's also the little things. Like being followed around in a store because someone assumes you're going to steal something, or having neighbors call the police on you for no reason other than the color of your skin." Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat, his words hitting too close to home. She glanced around the room, wondering if anyone else noticed her squirming. Most of the participants were nodding along, some even chiming in with their own experiences. A middle-aged Asian woman talked about being told she spoke English so well, despite being born in the United States. A Latino teenager described being profiled by security guards at the mall. Each story added another layer to the conversation, painting a vivid picture of what life was like for those who didn't fit the mold. When it was Laura's turn to speak, she froze. Her throat tightened, and her palms grew clammy. All eyes were on her now, waiting expectantly. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she managed a weak smile and muttered, "I'm still learning." To her surprise, Jamal nodded understandingly. "That's okay," he said. "We're all here to learn. The fact that you showed up today says a lot." His response eased some of the tension in the room, but Laura couldn't shake the weight of guilt pressing down on her shoulders. Over the next hour, the group discussed ways to challenge implicit bias and build stronger communities. They brainstormed ideas for fostering empathy, such as hosting cultural exchange events and encouraging open conversations between neighbors. Laura listened quietly, taking notes, but rarely contributing. After the session ended, Laura lingered, behind, pretending to gather her belongings while the others filed out. She wasn't ready to face them or herself just yet. As she stood there, Jamal approached her, offering a warm smile. "You did good today," he said. It takes courage to step outside your comfort zone. Laura looked up, startled. I don't feel very courageous, she admitted. I feel lost. Everything I thought I knew seems wrong now. Jamal nodded sympathetically. Change is hard, but it's also necessary. You've taken the first step, and that's more than a lot of people are willing to do. His words stayed with her long after she left the community center. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Laura replayed the workshop in her mind. She thought about Jamal's stories, the frustration in his voice when he described being judged unfairly. She thought about the Latina mother who spoke about raising her children in a world that often saw them as criminals before they even had a chance to prove otherwise. And she thought about Elijah, standing calmly on his driveway, explaining why her actions mattered. For the first time, Laura allowed herself to see the bigger picture. She realized that her call to the police hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a system that favored people like her while marginalizing everyone else. It was overwhelming but also strangely liberating. If she could acknowledge her mistakes, maybe she could start making amends. Over the following weeks, Laura attended more workshops and seminars. Each session brought new insights and challenges. One day she learned about redlining and how it had shaped neighborhoods across America. Another day she heard firsthand accounts of racial profiling and its devastating effects. Slowly but surely, her perspective began to shift. At home, Laura started paying closer attention to her interactions with her neighbors. She made an effort to smile and wave at Marcus, or rather Elijah, when she saw him outside. At first, her gestures felt awkward and forced, but over time, they became more natural. She even baked cookies one afternoon and dropped them off at his doorstep, leaving a note that simply said, "Thank you for your patience." Elijah accepted the gesture graciously, though he remained cautious. He appreciated her efforts, but he knew real change required more than cookies and apologies. Still, he acknowledged that Laura was trying, and that was worth something. Meanwhile, word of the incident spread beyond the neighborhood. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as both a cautionary tale and a moment of reflection. Some praised Elijah for handling the situation with grace and purpose, while others criticized him for going too easy on Laura. Despite the mixed reactions, one thing became undeniable. The incident sparked a broader conversation about accountability and empathy. Inspired by the response, Elijah launched a nationwide initiative called Bridging Divides. The program focused on community engagement and education, bringing together people from different walks of life to share their experiences and work toward mutual understanding. It included town hall meetings, school programs, and even a documentary series highlighting stories of prejudice and reconciliation. People across the country started sharing their own experiences, creating a ripple effect of awareness and change. Neighbors who had once avoided each other began reaching out, eager to bridge the gaps between them. Schools incorporated lessons on diversity and inclusion into their curriculums, teaching students the importance of empathy from a young age. Even businesses got involved, implementing policies aimed at reducing bias in hiring practices and workplace culture. Back in the neighborhood, Laura continued to attend workshops and participate in discussions. She wasn't perfect. There were moments when old habits resurfaced and she had to remind herself to check her assumptions. But she was committed to doing better, not just for herself, but for the sake of her community. One evening, as she walked past Elijah's house, she saw him tending to his garden. Summoning her courage, she stopped and called out, "Hi, Mr. Carter, how's it going?" Elijah looked up, surprised but pleased. "Good evening, Mrs. Bennett. I'm doing well, thank you. And you?" "I'm getting there," Laura replied, honestly. "Still learning, but I think I'm heading in the right direction." Elijah smiled warmly. "That's all any of us can ask for. Keep going, Mrs. Bennett. You're making a difference." Laura returned his smile, feeling a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly didn't happen overnight, but every step forward counted, and she was determined to keep moving ahead, one small step at a time. Months had passed since Elijah first moved into the neighborhood, and the ripple effects of his encounter with Laura continued to grow. What started as a single incident, a misguided call to the police, had blossomed into something much larger, a movement toward understanding and unity. Neighbors who once kept to themselves now exchanged greetings and stories. Conversations that used to focus solely on weather or local gossip began including discussions about equity, empathy, and what it meant to truly belong in a community. Elijah decided it was time to celebrate how far they'd come. He planned a barbecue at his house, inviting everyone on the street to join him for an afternoon of food, laughter, and connection. It wasn't just a social gathering. It was a chance to reflect on their journey together and look ahead to the work still left to do. On the day of the barbecue, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Children ran through sprinklers in the front yards while adults carried dishes and drinks to Elijah's backyard. The space was transformed into a lively scene, complete with string lights hanging between trees, checkered tablecloths covering picnic tables, and the smell of grilled burgers wafting through the air. Elijah stood by the grill, expertly flipping patties and chatting with whoever wandered over. His calm demeanor put people at ease, even those who might have felt intimidated by his title. For today, he wasn't the director of the FBI. He was simply a neighbor hosting a get-together. Laura arrived later than most, clutching a plate of cookies she had baked earlier that morning. She lingered near the edge of the yard, scanning the crowd nervously. This was her first real interaction with many of her neighbors since the incident, and she worried they might judge her, or worse, ignore her altogether. Taking a deep breath, she approached Elijah, who was busy seasoning chicken wings. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, holding out the plate, "I brought these. I hope you like them." Elijah turned, his face lighting up with a genuine smile. "Mrs. Bennett, thank you so much. These look delicious." He set the plate aside and gestured for her to stay. "Why don't you grab a drink and relax? Everyone's here to enjoy themselves." Laura hesitated but eventually nodded, heading toward the refreshment table. As she poured herself a glass of lemonade, she noticed several neighbors glancing her way. Some offered polite smiles, while others quickly looked away. She couldn't blame them. She knew she had a lot to make up for. Still, she appreciated the effort they were making to include her. Throughout the afternoon, small moments of connection began to unfold. Jamal Thompson, the activist from the workshops, introduced himself to Laura and thanked her for participating in the program. "Not everyone would stick with it," he said kindly. "But you did, and that shows strength." Laura blushed, unsure how to respond. "I'm trying," she admitted. "It's not easy, but I know it's important." Nearby, Emily, the young woman Laura had accused Elijah of harassing, sat chatting with another neighbor. When Laura walked past, Emily waved her over. "Hey, Mrs. Bennett, have you tried the potato salad? It's amazing." Caught off guard by the friendly invitation, Laura smiled shyly and joined them. They chatted about gardening, favorite recipes, and upcoming block parties. For the first time in years, Laura felt like part of the community, rather than an outsider, looking in. As the sun began to set, Elijah called everyone together for a brief speech. Standing on the deck overlooking the backyard, he held up a hand to quiet the chatter. The crowd turned to face him, their faces glowing in the golden light of dusk. "Thank you all for being here today," Elijah began, his voice warm and steady. "When I first moved into this neighborhood, I didn't know what to expect. I came here hoping to learn, to understand the challenges faced by marginalized communities and find ways to address them. What I found instead was something unexpected: resilience, compassion, and a willingness to grow." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "We've faced some tough moments, and will likely face more in the future. But today isn't about dwelling on the past. It's about celebrating how far we've come. Together, we've shown that change is possible. We've proven that when we listen, when we challenge our assumptions, and when we open our hearts, we can build bridges where there once were divides." The crowd erupted into applause, cheering loudly. Laura clapped along with them, tears welling up in her eyes. She hadn't expected to feel so moved, but hearing Elijah's words reminded her of why she had stuck with the workshops despite her discomfort. Change wasn't easy, but it was worth it. After the speech, the party resumed, with music playing softly in the background and laughter filling the air. Laura found herself talking to more neighbors, some of whom shared their own struggles with prejudice and misunderstanding. One woman spoke about being mistaken for the nanny of her biracial grandchildren. Another man recounted being denied service at a restaurant because of his accent. Each story reinforced the importance of listening and learning from one another. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the barbecue was winding down. Neighbors began packing up leftovers and saying their goodbyes. Laura lingered behind, helping Elijah clean up. As they worked side by side, she finally mustered the courage to say what had been on her mind for weeks. "Mr. Carter," she began hesitantly, "I just want to say thank you. Not just for today, but for everything. You could have handled things differently after my call, but you chose to teach me instead of punishing me. That means a lot." Elijah stopped what he was doing and looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Bennett, I believe in second chances and third, fourth, and fifth chances if needed. No one is perfect and we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after those mistakes. You've shown a willingness to grow, and that's something to be proud of." Laura nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. She knew she still had a long way to go, but she was ready to keep moving forward. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful, not just for herself, but for the world around her. Later that night, as Elijah sat on his porch watching the stars, he reflected on the journey he had embarked upon. He had set out to understand systemic racism from the ground up, and in doing so, he had sparked a transformation, not just in his neighbors, but in himself as well. While there was still much work to be done, he took comfort in knowing that every step counted. Change didn't happen overnight, but it happened. And sometimes all it took was one person choosing to confront their biases, one neighbor reaching out a hand, or one leader deciding to lead by example. In this quiet suburban neighborhood, progress was happening. One conversation, one gesture, one moment at a time. The morning sun rose gently over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the streets and filling the air with a sense of new beginnings. It was Elijah's last day in the suburb. He had decided it was time to step back into his official role fully. His experiment in living undercover among ordinary people had taught him more than he ever expected, both about others and himself. Now, as he prepared to leave, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: pride for what they had accomplished together, gratitude for the connections he had made, and a tinge of sadness for saying goodbye. Laura arrived early, standing awkwardly by her porch as she watched Elijah oversee the loading of his belongings into the moving truck. She had woken up that morning determined to see him off properly, though she wasn't sure how to express everything she wanted to say. Over the past months, she had grown to respect Elijah, not just as a neighbor, but as a person who had shown her patience and understanding when she least deserved it. Saying goodbye felt harder than she anticipated. Finally, she mustered the courage to walk over. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, stopping a few feet away. I wanted to wish you well before you go." Elijah turned, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Mrs. Bennett, thank you for coming. I appreciate it." They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, until Laura broke the silence. "I don't know if I've said this enough, but thank you for everything. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible." Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Change isn't easy, Mrs. Bennett, but you've embraced it with honesty and effort. That's all anyone can ask for." "I hope so," Laura replied, her voice wavering slightly. "I still have a lot to learn, but I promise I'll keep trying. This neighborhood, it's better because of you. We're better because of you." Elijah extended his hand, and after a brief pause, Laura took it. Their handshake lingered, a symbol of the journey they had shared, a journey marked by conflict, growth, and ultimately, reconciliation. As the truck was nearly packed, other neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some came bearing small gifts: a jar of homemade jam, a potted plant, a handwritten note wishing him luck. Others simply stood nearby, waving or calling out farewells. Even those who had once been wary of Elijah now approached him with smiles and gratitude. "You'll always have a home here," one neighbor said, patting him on the shoulder. "Don't forget about us, okay?" "I won't," Elijah promised. "And I hope you won't forget the lessons we've learned together." The gathering grew livelier as people shared stories and laughter, reminiscing about the barbecue, the workshops, and the countless little moments that had brought them closer. Children ran around playing tag while adults exchanged hugs and promises to stay in touch. The energy was bittersweet, joyful yet underscored by the knowledge that Elijah wouldn't be there anymore to guide them. Before climbing into the driver's seat of the moving truck, Elijah addressed the crowd one last time. Standing beside the vehicle, he looked out at the faces gathered before him, young and old, diverse yet united. "When I first came here," he began, his voice carrying clearly despite the morning breeze, "I didn't know what to expect. I thought I'd find division, mistrust, maybe even hostility. Instead, I found something far greater: resilience, courage, and a willingness to change. Each of you has played a part in creating a stronger, kinder community. Don't stop now." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the group. "Real change takes time. It requires patience, effort, and a commitment to listening, even when it's uncomfortable. But I believe in you. I believe in this neighborhood. And I believe that together, you can continue building bridges where there once were walls." Applause erupted, followed by cheers and whistles. Someone shouted, "We'll miss you," which prompted nods and murmurs of agreement. Elijah smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He hadn't solved every problem. They all knew there was still work to do. But he had planted seeds of understanding that would continue to grow long after he was gone. With a final wave, Elijah climbed into the truck and started the engine. As it pulled away from the curb, neighbors waved enthusiastically, some even running alongside it for a few steps. Laura stayed rooted to her spot, watching until the truck disappeared around the corner. Only then did she turn and head back to her porch, her heart heavy but hopeful. Later that afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Inspired by Elijah's farewell speech, several residents organized a meeting to discuss next steps. They talked about continuing the workshops, hosting regular community events, and finding ways to support marginalized voices within their area. Laura attended the meeting, speaking up for the first time in such a setting. "We owe it to Mr. Carter and to ourselves to keep going," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "He gave us tools to make things better. Let's use them." Her words earned nods of approval, and soon plans were underway to carry forward Elijah's vision. The neighborhood formed a committee dedicated to fostering inclusivity and addressing issues of bias. They reached out to local organizations, collaborated with schools, and invited speakers to lead discussions on topics like systemic racism, allyship, and cultural awareness. Over the following weeks, Laura threw herself into the work. She helped organize a book club focused on literature written by authors of color, coordinated a food drive for underserved communities, and volunteered at a nearby shelter. Each action, no matter how small, reminded her of Elijah's belief in the power of incremental progress. One evening, as she sat on her porch sipping tea, Laura reflected on how much had changed, not just in the neighborhood, but within herself. She remembered the woman she used to be, the one who clung to outdated beliefs and judged others based on appearances. That version of herself felt like a stranger now, someone she barely recognized. She glanced toward Elijah's former house, which had recently been sold to a young interracial couple. They had moved in just days ago, and already, Laura had introduced herself and welcomed them warmly. It was a small gesture, but it felt meaningful, a sign that the lessons she had learned were taking root. In Washington, D.C., Elijah settled back into his role as director of the FBI. Though his responsibilities kept him busy, he often thought about the neighborhood and the people he had left behind. He wrote letters to Laura and a few other neighbors, updating them on his work and encouraging them to stay committed to their efforts. In return, they sent him photos of community events, updates on projects they had started, and heartfelt messages expressing their gratitude. One letter from Laura stood out in particular. "Dear Mr. Carter," it read, "I wanted to let you know that I'm still learning. Sometimes I stumble, but I remind myself of what you taught me, that change starts with awareness. Our neighborhood isn't perfect, but it's kinder, more open, and more united than it was before. Thank you for showing us the way." Elijah folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer alongside others he had received. Each one served as a reminder of why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. Change might not happen overnight, but every step forward counted, and sometimes all it took was one unexpected confrontation or one compassionate leader to set the wheels of progress in motion. As he gazed out the window of his office, Elijah allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but he faced it with renewed optimism. He believed in the potential for growth, not just in individuals, but in entire communities. Together, they could build a future defined not by division, but by connection.